That night, when a severe Atlantic gale battered London, at the exact moment her car was rammed and dragged by a white Range Rover that had run a red light, Eleanor did not hear the deafening screech of metal. Instead, she heard a deep, muffled snap within her own abdomen, as if something had torn loose deep inside. A warm liquid ran down her thighs, soaking the hem of her dress. It wasn't blood, it was amniotic fluid. The seatbelt dug mercilessly into her body. The steering wheel crushed her swollen belly. The airbag deployed with a loud crack and instantly deflated. The white powder made her cough twice. Every cough echoed in her abdomen with a tearing, downward-pulling agony. It took Eleanor 3 seconds to realize she was still alive, and another 2 to process something else. She was in labor, 37 weeks, a premature birth. The wipers continued to sweep mechanically across the shattered windscreen. The glass was half destroyed, and the gale-force wind, carrying torrential rain, whipped through the cracks, lashing her face, arms, and belly. She tried to move, but her left knee was completely trapped under the mangled dashboard. The acute pain caused. Instinctively, she leaned toward the passenger seat for her mobile, but it had slid onto the floor mat. The screen was cracked, but it still glowed. The first name on her favorites list was illuminated, Victor Sterling. Eleanor's thumb hovered over those letters. She waited exactly 5 seconds, then pressed call. In 5 years of marriage, it was the first time she had ever dialed his personal number herself. 5 years, 1,825 days, and she had never broken the golden rule. During business hours, do not contact. Outside business hours, do not call without a compelling reason. If she needed anything, she was to speak to his assistant, James. He answered in 1 second, 2 seconds. In the background, the public address system of the British Airways first-class lounge at Heathrow Terminal 5 could be heard. What is it? 3 words. No term of endearment. Not a single trace of emotion in his voice. As if he were receiving a routine administrative report. Eleanor opened her mouth, but a fresh spasm of pain twisted her womb. She gritted her teeth, forcing the words out of her throat. I've been in an accident on the M4. My waters have broken. There was a 1-second pause on the line. Then he spoke, slightly faster, but with the exact same total absence of warmth. Have you called 999? Yes, the operator said. Because of the storm, there'll be at least 40 minutes. Then wait. Eleanor's fingers were trembling, and not from the cold. Victor, I'm alone. I'm at the airport, he interrupted, and for the first time, a hint of feeling seeped into his voice. It wasn't concern. It was a veiled irritation, the displeasure of having his itinerary disrupted. Chloe's flight has landed. She has a perforated ulcer. I have to pick her up. Wait for the ambulance. Don't make a scene. Call ended. He had hung up. Eleanor's hand, still clutching the phone, dropped onto her dress, now soaked with rain and bodily fluids. The call duration glowed on the screen. 47 seconds. It had taken her 5 years to muster the courage to make that first call. 47 seconds. The pain in her abdomen came in increasingly violent waves. The intervals were shortening. The contractions had begun irregular, furious, as if someone were wringing out a wet towel inside her, squeezing with brutal force. She hunched over, resting her forehead against the steering wheel. The lukewarm fluid trickled down her legs, pooling in her shoes. The rain poured down like a waterfall. Through the shattered window, visibility was 0. It was in that precise moment that the door of the white Range Rover ahead of her opened. A very young woman stumbled out, wrapped in a £4,000 beige Burberry cashmere coat. Her long hair was drenched and plastered to her face. Her makeup had run, but not even that could hide her refined beauty. She was on the phone. Through the broken window, Eleanor watched as the woman shivered, pressing the device to her ear. Her voice was sweet and soft, laced with tearful tones, a mix between a petulant whine and a plea for help. Victor, I've smashed the car. I'm so scared. It's pouring. I'm all alone on the motorway. Can you come get me? My tummy hurts so much, Victor. That name pierced Eleanor's heart like an icicle. She knew that woman, Chloe Harrington, Victor's first love from their time at Oxford. 3 years ago, she had gone abroad to study. She was a fashion influencer with 2 million Instagram followers. The guest of honor at the Sterling Group's annual charity gala. The girl with the radiant smile and ponytail, whose framed photograph sat on Victor's mahogany desk. Just a friend, he had told her during their first year of marriage when she noticed the photo in his study. She had asked only once. He hadn't even looked up from his paperwork. His tone was that of someone stating a fact unworthy of debate. A friend? Do friends cry and call you by your first name in the middle of a torrential storm? Can a friend dial the personal number that is forbidden even to a wife? Does a man erase his wife who has just gone into labor from his agenda for a friend, sparing her a mere 47 seconds? Eleanor didn't know. All she knew was that the agony in her womb was intensifying. The interval between contractions had dropped from 5 minutes to 3. Her consciousness began to blur. The roar of the rain, the hum of passing engines, the weeping of that woman, all sounds were swallowed by a colossal void. She could only hear her own heartbeat. Thump, thump, growing slower. 12 minutes later, a black Bentley Mulsanne pierced the curtain of rain. She recognized the car, the custom Sterling Group number plate. On the door handle, a discreet silver emblem, Victor's personal insignia. The vehicle stopped millimetrically beside Chloe. The door opened, and through the mist of the downpour, Victor emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, even wearing only a bespoke charcoal grey shirt, he exuded a suffocating authority. There was not an ounce of panic in his stride, his gaze locked infallibly onto Chloe. Eleanor watched as he closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. She watched as he unbuttoned his handmade Savile Row overcoat. His gold cufflinks flashed in the glare of the headlights as he draped the coat over Chloe's fragile shoulders. "I told you to call the chauffeur," his voice carried through the storm. Deep, reproaching. But at the end of the sentence, an almost imperceptible tenderness slipped through. Chloe huddled into the coat and lifted her tearful eyes. "I'm sorry, I wanted to drive. I think I hit someone's car." Victor's gaze finally left Chloe and swept over the crash site. He saw Eleanor's car, or rather, he saw a black Jaguar F-Pace twisted beyond recognition. He saw the smashed windscreen, the crumpled bonnet, the deployed airbag, but his eyes lingered there for less than 2 seconds before returning to Chloe. "James will handle it. Get in the car, you're shivering." Eleanor was sitting inside that mangled Jaguar. Her left knee was still pinned beneath the dashboard. Her dress was thoroughly drenched in rain and fluids. The white silk had taken on a macabre, pale pink hue, the color of amniotic fluid mixed with blood. Her husband was 11 meters away. He saw the car, but he didn't see her. Or rather, he chose not to look. In 5 years of marriage, he didn't even know what car his wife drove. Suddenly, Eleanor felt everything go utterly silent. A strange, absolute silence. The roar of the downpour vanished, as did the hum of the engine and Chloe's crying. Even the pain of the contractions dissolved into that immense void. She only watched as the tail lights of the Bentley flared red in the foggy rain. It reversed, turned, and vanished into the storm, taking Chloe away. The headlights, like 2 smears of dark blood, quickly faded into the gloom. Eleanor leaned her head against the headrest and looked down at her belly. A new contraction hit, far more brutal than the last. Her body arched, her fingernails dug into the leather steering wheel cover until they bled. She couldn't hold it in anymore and screamed. Not from the physical agony, but because she didn't know what else she could possibly do but scream. Then, she picked up her cracked phone. She didn't call Victor, nor did she dial 999. She scrolled to the bottom of her contacts and dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. "Hello?" An elderly but lucid female voice echoed on the other end. Her grandmother. Eleanor's voice was so eerily calm it didn't belong to a woman enduring the throes of labor. "It's me. I need help." "Ellie? You?" Crash on the M4. "My waters broke." She paused, grinding her teeth against another contraction, and continued. "The NHS ambulance will take at least another half hour. Contact Dr. Cavendish, the one who did my heart surgery in Zurich. Tell him to dispatch a private mobile ICU. I'll ping you the coordinates." "Understood, my darling. Hold on. Nana is on it. And one more thing." Eleanor's voice trembled, but every syllable was razor sharp. "When I deliver this baby, I want to leave here forever. Prepare my EU passports and the offshore accounts." There was a silence on the line. 2 seconds later, the 82-year-old woman replied with a single word. "Done." Eleanor hung up. In the black mirror of the screen she saw her own reflection. A graze on her forehead, a deathly pale complexion, lips bitten raw. The soaked dress clung to her belly, which shuddered with violent spasms every 2 minutes. She tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and cradled her womb with both hands. During the next contraction, she didn't scream. She sank her teeth into the back of her hand, leaving a deep indentation. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Not from the pain, but from an incredible sensation rising from her very core, stronger than the labor pains. It was as if a string that had been pulled taut for 5 years had hummed its final vibrating note in the stormy night before snapping completely. What did she remember? She remembered the day before their wedding, standing outside the Chelsea Register office. Victor had handed her a thick prenuptial agreement, his face colder than when signing any corporate merger. Clause 1. Keep the marriage a secret. Do not make the relationship public. Clause 2. Do not interfere in each other's private lives. Clause 3. Barring extreme emergencies, do not call. Clause 4. He had looked up from the document, not a drop of warmth in his eyes, only a routine calculation. Do not harbour false hopes. And she hadn't. For 5 years she lived like a ghost in a sprawling mansion in St. George's Hill, Weybridge. His bespoke suits from Giev's and Hawkes were always hung on the left side of the walk-in wardrobe, meticulously arranged by season and shade. His lansoprazole for his stomach ulcer rested in the second drawer of the left bedside table. His morning coffee was brewed with water at exactly 92 degrees Celsius, 18 grams of Kenyan beans, 25 seconds of extraction. In his globetrotter luggage for business trips, his clothes were packed strictly in the order he would wear them. She remembered everything about him, and he didn't even know what car she drove. At that very moment, the Bentley carrying Chloe was gliding toward a private clinic. Eleanor knew this, because that same afternoon, she had inputted a note into Victor's calendar. 2030. Heathrow T5. Collect Chloe. She had organized it herself. Even the logistics of him picking up another woman had been managed by her. There was a time when she believed this gave her the illusion of being a silent participant in his life. Now, it was just absurd. The torrential rain did not cease. The motorway was deserted. The Met Office had issued a rare red weather warning. Aside from the Bentley that had vanished, not a single car passed. Eleanor's consciousness began to fade. Blood loss, pain shock, dehydration. Her body was fighting 3 lethal factors simultaneously, but she did not pass out. She didn't have the right to. Pinching her thigh brutally, she cleared her mind for a fraction of a second and pulled a folding pocket knife from the glove box. Not for her, for the baby. In case the public or private ambulances didn't arrive in time, in case the baby couldn't wait any longer, she would have to cut the umbilical cord herself. The cold metal grounded her palm. She closed her eyes and listened to her own breathing. Inhale, exhale. Every breath reminded her she was still alive. 23 minutes later, an unmarked black Mercedes Sprinter pulled up alongside her. The doors flew open, and 2 people in dark paramedic uniforms jumped out, young, moving with clinical precision. The woman shone a torch through the broken window and froze at the sight of Eleanor. "Mrs. Sterling, we're from Dr. Cavendish." Eleanor's voice sounded gravelly, but lucid. "Check dilation first. Be careful. I suspect a fracture in my left knee." The paramedic's expression shifted not because of the gruesome injuries, but because a woman trapped in a mangled wreck for half an hour, nursing a fracture and enduring brutal contractions, was capable of issuing orders in such a tone. But she didn't ask questions. She followed instructions. 47 minutes later, cutting through the roar of the gale, came the weak, raspy cry of an infant, sounding like a kitten's mew. Eleanor gave birth to a boy in the back seat of the ruined Jaguar, where the medics had dragged her. 37 weeks, weighing less than 5.5 pounds, skin wrinkled and bluish. Eleanor received the tiny body wrapped in a foil thermal blanket. Trembling violently, dried blood caked beneath her fingernails, she stared at his scrunched face for a long time. She didn't cry. She always thought she would cry in this moment. During her sleepless nights waiting up for her husband, she had often imagined the birth of her child. She imagined a bright Portland hospital suite, the congratulations of the consultants. She imagined he would at least be pacing outside the door. Now, she felt nothing. Just like her shattered knee. When pain reaches its absolute limit, it simply ceases to exist. When it hurts too much, people don't cry. The ambulance driver started the engine. "Mrs. Sterling, we're taking you to the nearest A&E. No local NHS hospitals." Eleanor's voice was a low rasp that brokered no argument. "Direct to Farnborough Airport. Which runway is Cavendish's jet on?" The paramedics exchanged a look. "The executive terminal." "But in your condition..." "I know my condition better than you do." Eleanor hugged the baby tighter. On the last word, her voice finally broke. "Drive." The vehicle pulled onto the motorway. The wipers thrashed frantically. Eleanor leaned back against the stretcher, clutching the baby to her chest. She had stopped crying, huddled in the foil blanket. His tiny fist grasped the edge of her ruined silk dress. She looked out the window. The storm raged. The world was collapsing. She looked up at the road signs flashing past in the dark. M4, London, Heathrow. Each one told her she was leaving. She was abandoning this city, that mansion in Weybridge. She was abandoning the wardrobe with the color-coded suits and the 9-2-degree morning coffee. She was abandoning the man who, in 5 years of marriage, hadn't deigned to know what car she drove. "We're leaving," she whispered to the baby. Her voice was heard only by the stale air of the ambulance. This time, forever. When the private Bombardier jet touched down at Zurich Airport, Eleanor's core body temperature was 34.8 degrees. The cabin doors opened, and 2 Swiss paramedics in navy uniforms boarded with a gurney. The consultant, taking one look at the dried blood on the dress and the baby in the thermal blanket, immediately switched to English. "How long since delivery?" 3 hours and 17 minutes, Eleanor rasped, unnervingly precise. "Placenta delivered, uterus contracting weakly. Visual blood loss is roughly 600 milliliters. Suspected hairline fracture in the left tibial plateau. No x-rays taken. Premature infant, 37 weeks, under 2.5 kilos, brief asphyxia at birth. Respiration is now stable." The consultant stood frozen for a second, not at the severity of the trauma, but because a mother who had just survived a car crash, a hemorrhage, and an unmedicated birth was rattling off her vitals with mathematical precision. Onto the gurney, the doctor ordered sharply. "Professor Cavendish's neonatal team is waiting on the tarmac." "Wait." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the foil blanket. The baby let out a faint whimper. "Check the boy first." "Can I walk?" She couldn't. The moment she tried to stand, her left leg completely gave way. An agonizing bolt of pain shot through her knee like an electric shock. She pitched forward, nearly collapsing, but a paramedic caught her. Eleanor clenched her jaw, refusing to make a sound. She looked down at her leg. Below the knee, the fabric of her dress had stiffened with blood, turning into a black crust under the jet's air conditioning. They finally strapped her to the gurney, and the neonatal team took the infant. When they slightly opened the blanket, the tiny boy's wrinkled face contorted further at the change in temperature. His little fist swatted blindly at the air. Eleanor turned her head, refusing to tear her eyes away from the doors of the neonatal intensive care unit until they swung shut. Then, she closed her eyes. She didn't fall asleep, she simply allowed herself to stop. Since the impact on the M4, her brain had been operating at maximum capacity for nearly 4 hours. Her actuary's instinct had forced her to make the optimal decision at every critical juncture. Call her grandmother, issue orders to the medical team, choose Switzerland over a London hospital. But now, as they wheeled the gurney into the lift, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. It wasn't the cold. The string, pulled to its absolute breaking point 4 hours ago, had finally snapped upon reaching safety. She trembled for about 10 seconds. Hiding her hands under the hospital blanket, she balled them into fists, driving her nails into her palms until the shaking stopped. 6 hours later, Dr. Cavendish entered the private suite. Torn medial collateral ligament in the left knee. Hairline fracture on the tibial condyle. He reviewed the x-rays, speaking in a measured, soothing tone. "The good news is you don't need surgery. The bad news, minimum 6 weeks non-weight bearing." He paused, looking over his spectacles at her. "As for the postpartum recovery, you're showing signs of mild myocardial damage, and this didn't happen today. This is the result of prolonged, severe stress and chronic sleep deprivation. When was the last time you had a full physical on Harley Street?" Eleanor lay in the hospital bed, her left leg in a brace. Under the clinical lights, her face looked almost translucent. 3 years. 3 years without a checkup, and her heart had begun to fail. "Rest," the doctor said, closing her chart. "Stop pretending you're made of iron." He left, leaving Eleanor alone. Outside the window, the Zurich night glittered, a world entirely opposed to the violent storm on the motorway. Eleanor didn't look out the window. She leaned over to the bedside table and picked up her shattered mobile. She hadn't thrown it away because it held exactly what she needed. She opened the Notes app. There was a list. It hadn't been written today. It had been written 3 months ago. The title consisted of a single word: evacuation. The list was detailed, divided into 7 bullet points. Bank accounts. Empty the 4 UK current accounts. Transfer funds to offshore trusts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Property and vehicles. No real estate in my name. Jaguar registered to the Sterling Group fleet. No action required. Social ties. Delete all UK social media profiles. Terminate the O2 mobile contract. Medical records. Contact Dr. Cavendish to arrange an international death certificate. Swiss law permits this under highly specific, classified circumstances. Civil registry. Instruct the solicitor to cancel my UK national insurance and passport records based on the death certificate. Sterling Group assets, transfer management rights of the family trusts, backup of the family fund data, completed. The baby, register the birth certificate exclusively within the Swiss Canton system, zero data transmission to UK databases. She had started formulating this plan 3 months ago. Not because of today's crash, not because of the 4-7-second phone call, not because the Bentley drove straight past her, but because, 3 months ago, in Victor's wall safe, she had found a change of beneficiary form for a British Virgin Islands offshore trust. In the beneficiary box, there was one name, Chloe Harrington. Eleanor had structured that very trust for Victor 2 years prior. The architecture, the tax optimization, it was all her flawless work. After reading the document, she put it exactly back where she found it. She locked the safe, went down to the kitchen, boiled water to exactly 85 degrees, brewed his Earl Grey tea, left it on his desk, and went back to her bedroom. She opened her laptop and created the note. Evacuation. She had been waiting for the right moment. She wanted to wait until after the birth and her postpartum recovery. Victor had simply accelerated the timeline. Eleanor stared at the list, slowly scrolling down the screen. She stopped at the 4th point. Procure death certificate. She stared at that line for a long time. What does it take for a living person to legally die? A medical report from an internationally accredited clinic, legalization by the British Embassy, and transmission of the data to the UK General Register Office to invalidate all identity documents. If a patient dies from complications and the Chief Medical Officer certifies it, death becomes a legal fact. And Dr. Cavendish had been her grandmother's personal physician for 20 years. Eleanor lowered the phone and closed her eyes. She wasn't thinking of herself. She was thinking of the baby in the incubator, whose fists were smaller than half her palm. If she survived, Victor would find her. Not out of love, but out of a psychotic need for control. A man accustomed to absolute order would never allow a piece to leave the chessboard without his permission. He would unleash an army of city solicitors, leverage all his resources, and drag her back from any corner of the globe. Not for her, for his prestiger, for his order. But if she died, nobody searches for the dead. The dead do not threaten the order of the living. The dead do not take your children away. Eleanor dialed a number. Dr. Cavendish, we need to talk. The next day, in the VIP suite of the University Hospital Zurich, the consultant stood by her bed, twirling a Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. His expression was far grimmer than the day before. Are you absolutely certain, Eleanor? There's no going back from this. The moment I sign this certificate and it clears the British consulate, you will be erased from the UK registry. Your passport, your driving license, your national insurance number, everything will be legally voided. You will cease to exist. I know. We will register the boy under Swiss jurisdiction. In the box for father, put a dash. The doctor placed the pen on the table. His fingers were trembling slightly. Does your grandmother know? It was her idea. Silence filled the room. The physician looked at her casted leg, then at her pale face, and finally, he met her tranquil eyes. Very well. He picked up the pen and pressed his signature onto the final page of the document. For the cause of death, I will state, postpartum hemorrhage complicated by acute myocardial infarction. It is the closest alignment with your actual physiological trauma. No one in Whitehall will question it. Thank you, doctor. Don't thank me. Just live. That is your grandmother's only demand. Eleanor took the document. On the crisp white paper sat the doctor's signature and the clinic's official seal. She stared at it for 3 seconds, then locked it in the bedside drawer. From that moment, the execution of the plan she had mentally rehearsed thousands of times began. The extraction of funds had started 3 months ago. £50,000 tranches moved on random days through legal asset distribution channels. Victor would never notice because the management of those accounts had always fallen to her. Deleting her social media took 1 click. She had nothing personal on them anyway. 5 years of a secret marriage had left her digital footprint as blank as a sheet of A4 paper. She would cancel her mobile contract that very afternoon. The only thing that would take time was the consular legalization. Approximately 7 to 10 days. 10 days. During that time, Victor wouldn't notice a thing. After all, in his world, she already didn't exist. Meanwhile, on the other side of the continent, in London, on the morning after the great storm, Victor Sterling woke up in his master bedroom. His alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. As he did every day, he reached out with his eyes closed toward the second drawer of the bedside table to grab his lansoprazole and wash it down with lukewarm water. The glass was always waiting on the marble coaster. His fingers brushed the crystal. The weight was wrong. The glass was empty. Victor opened his eyes. The crystal tumbler was bone dry. Normally, At this exact hour, there would be exactly 200 milliliters of water at a temperature of 37 degrees. The water would cool overnight to reach that perfect state. He had a delicate stomach. Cold water irritated it, and he despised hot water. He dismissed it. He got up and went to the en-suite bathroom. His electric toothbrush rested by the sink. Beside it was an empty space. His gaze lingered for a second. What used to be there? He couldn't remember. The visual density of the objects had simply shifted, like a book missing from a shelf. It wasn't critical, but the eye noticed. After washing his face, he walked into the walk-in wardrobe. The left side was entirely his. His suits hung strictly by color scheme: charcoal, navy, black. The distance between the wooden hangers was exactly 3 fingers. He reached for a grey cashmere blazer, and only as he pulled it out did he realize that the pre-matched shirt and tie were not hanging inside it. Who usually paired them? He had always felt as though the wardrobe simply possessed that function autonomously. Today, a naked wire hanger poked out from inside the jacket. He checked the adjacent blazers. Empty. Weren't the shirts always there? He wasn't sure. Selecting a crisp white shirt himself, he went down to the kitchen. There was no breakfast on the kitchen island. Usually, a low-sodium, calorie-controlled breakfast awaited him. His ulcer forbade greasy food. What exactly was it usually? He couldn't say. The meals varied, but they were always flawless. Today, the marble counter was bare. He opened the massive Sub-Zero fridge. Inside sat a row of Daylesford organic prep containers. Each had a date label. The first one was dated 4 days ago. He grabbed one and microwaved it. It tasted fine, but the date... What did it matter? After eating, he grabbed his briefcase and walked out. The chauffeur was waiting by the front door. Opening the rear door, Victor glanced out of habit at the seatback pocket in front of him. Usually, a printed itinerary of his day, a bottle of room-temperature Hilden water, and a pillbox were slotted there. The pocket was empty. "Where's James?" he asked the driver. "James requested the day off for family reasons, sir." Victor didn't pry further. He opened the digital calendar on his phone. Blank. The last entry was from the day before yesterday, 20:30, Heathrow T5, collect Chloe. Eleanor had typed that note. Victor stared at the screen for a couple of seconds, then dialed Eleanor's number. "The number you are calling is currently switched off or out of coverage area." He pulled the phone away and checked the number. No mistake. He dialed again, the same mechanical British voice. Pocketing his mobile, he headed to the city with an impenetrable expression. At the Canary Wharf office, he ordered his secretary to contact Eleanor. The secretary returned with a perplexed look. "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling's mobile number has been disconnected, and her corporate WhatsApp account no longer exists." "When was it disconnected?" "The exact time is unknown, sir. O2 informed us that the contract was terminated at the account holder's request." Victor tapped a finger against his mahogany desk. "Perfect. Let her wait." His tone was exactly the same as during that 4-7 second call. Cold, routine indifference. He decided she was simply throwing a tantrum. On the 3rd day, James returned from his leave. The very first thing he did was walk in with the police report from the M4 accident. "Mr. Sterling, regarding the crash on the M4, the case is closed. The second car belonged to a woman. Chloe ran a red light. The insurance has settled it. The car she collided with," James flipped through the dossier, "was a black Jaguar F-Pace registered to." James's voice caught. Registered to whom? Victor didn't even look up from the quarterly fleet report. Primary driver, Eleanor Sterling. Victor's hand, midway through turning a page, froze for a full second. Then he flipped the page. Were there casualties? According to the Met Police report, the driver left the scene on foot and headed to a hospital. "I'm still verifying the extent of the injuries. When you find out, let me know." When James left, Victor kept staring at the report. His eyes remained locked onto a single line of digits for 40 seconds. He never turned the next page. On the 5th day, Victor discovered the first aid cabinet in his private office was empty. It wasn't just out of one medication. Every single compartment was bare. No lansoprazole, no Nurofen, no throat lozenges, not even a plaster. He stood bewildered. The cabinet was never empty. Around the 15th of every month, it silently restocked itself, like a self-updating operating system. Today was the 23rd. He sent his secretary to the Boots pharmacy downstairs. She brought back a standard blister pack of generic omeprazole. He was used to taking an imported brand from a bespoke white bottle. Who bought it and from where? He had no idea. That evening, returning to the Weybridge estate, He opened the right side of the walk-in wardrobe. It occupied barely a third of the space. He vaguely remembered what hung there: women's clothing in neutral tones, soft fabrics. Now, it was empty. Only white wooden hangers remained, looking like the mute ribs of a skeleton. On the carpet, there was an indentation the exact size of a shoebox, but no box. He wasn't even sure how many dresses had actually hung there. On the 7th day, his stomach ulcer flared. Around 6:00 p.m., while signing off on corporate mergers, his gut twisted as if crushed by a fist. Stomach acid scorched his esophagus. He grimaced, dropped his fountain pen, and pressed a hand to his abdomen. Cold sweat beaded his temples. He snapped a pill from the Boots blister pack and reached for the water dispenser. The filtered water was around 22 degrees. Previously, a brushed steel thermos always sat on his desk. The water inside maintained at exactly 37 degrees. The thermos had vanished at some point. The freezing water made his stomach cramp even violently. He doubled over, resting his forehead on the desk. His tailored shirt clung to his sweating back. The ulcer was an old issue, but it hadn't flared with such viciousness in years. Who used to manage that? He straightened up, grabbed his phone, and dialed the disconnected number for the 3rd time. "The number you are calling." It was the 3rd time since that stormy night. Eleanor seemed to have evaporated into thin air. People who just run away from home leave footprints. Their friends know where they are. Their parents are informed. Their bank cards register transactions. She had left nothing. Number disconnected. Social media scrubbed. The Jaguar returned to the corporate garage. Her belongings vanished. Even the pale blue toothbrush he suddenly remembered the color was gone. The execution was so flawlessly clean. It was as if an actuary was handing over her portfolio before resigning. Victor leaned back in his leather executive chair. "She's just angry," he reasoned. For 5 years she had run like a Swiss watch, demanding nothing in return, never complaining. Occasionally, if he didn't sleep at home for 3 consecutive weekends, she would leave a post-it note on the second shelf of the fridge, and her tone would grow slightly frostier than usual. That was it. He decided that this, too, was merely prolonged resentment fueled by pregnancy hormones. Yes, he hadn't answered when she called a second time, but Chloe had a perforated ulcer. She would calm down and come back. On the 8th day, he woke up at 2 a.m. The silence had woken him. He used to hear sounds, the faint hum of the kettle boiling, soft footsteps on the landing, or simply the rhythm of someone else's breathing, an almost imperceptible vibration in the air that betrayed the presence of life. Now, there was nothing. The Surrey mansion felt like a sealed crypt crushing his chest. He rolled over and, out of pure reflex, reached his arm across to the other half of the Super King bed. The Egyptian cotton sheet was freezing and perfectly taut. That side was always cold. Or rather, he couldn't even remember if she had ever actually slept on that side. In 5 years, he didn't know which side of the bed his wife favored. Victor withdrew his hand and stared into the dark. He didn't sleep a wink until dawn. On the 9th day, James brought the complete accident report on the Jaguar. "Mr. Sterling, I've compiled the data on the collision." The assistant's voice carried an unnatural hesitation. Mrs. Sterling was indeed at the wheel of the Jaguar. Chloe ran the red light and T-boned her on the driver's side. The Jaguar was dragged roughly 7 meters. Victor was scrolling through his emails. "And then what?" James hesitated. "The 999 logs show that at 21, 23, 27 minutes after the impact, a call was received from the scene. The operator's transcript." He read from the printed sheet. "Crash on the motorway. 1 pregnant casualty. 37 weeks. Waters have broken." Victor's hand froze on his mouse. "What did you say?" "Pregnant. 37 weeks. Waters broken," James repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. A leaden silence fell over the corner office. "Did the ambulance arrive?" Victor asked in a flat monotone. "It did, but 52 minutes after the crash, the paramedic team reported the victim missing. The driver's seat was soaked in blood and amniotic fluid, but the woman was gone. I've scoured every hospital in Greater London and the home counties, NHS and private. There is no record of a maternity admission matching that profile." Victor closed his email client. His fingers gripped the mouse until the plastic creaked. "Keep digging." "Yes, sir." James reached the door, stopped, and added, "Mr. Sterling, she was 37 weeks." Victor's stare remained fixed on the black monitor, which reflected his own face. "I know," he replied. James said nothing more. Stepping into the corridor, he paused. A heavily pregnant wife, a brutal crash, blood, the deletion of all database records. All these fragments formed a horrifying picture in James's mind that sent a chill down his spine. But he was just the assistant. On the 10th day, at 8:00 a.m., Victor sat at his desk. The surface was bare. No daily agenda, no 37-degree thermos. To his right, the tray of meticulously prioritized documents was missing. In 10 days, his personal efficiency had plummeted by 40%. Not out of grief he had forbidden that word, but out of sheer inconvenience. An avalanche of trivial problems he had never previously considered crashed down on him. The housekeeper and private chef stopped turning up. It turned out Eleanor managed them via a WhatsApp group, and when her number was terminated, the group dissolved. No one collected his dry cleaning from Savile Row anymore. All of this provoked an unprecedented fury in Victor. He felt like a high-end supercomputer whose RAM module had been violently ripped out. The monitor was still on, but the programs were throwing error after fatal error. He picked up the intercom. 30 seconds later, James walked in. "It's been 10 days. Victor's tone was as flat as a stagnant stock chart. "She's still playing the victim, is she? Freeze every bank card tied to her name. Draft her an email. Tell her to stop this circus. I'm giving her 3 days. If not, she can face the legal consequences." James clutched the iPad in his hands tightly. "Mr. Sterling, what you asked me to investigate, do you want to hear it now?" Victor steepled his fingers over his stomach. "Speak." James's lips trembled. He looked at the iPad, then at his boss. "I will prepare the full report for your lunch hour," he whispered, and walked out. Victor narrowed his eyes at the closed door, then turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames. The sun was blinding. The London sky, post-storm, was as clear as freshly washed crystal. He still genuinely believed he had the situation under control. At 14:17, a cold, black espresso sat on Victor's desk, leaving a brown ring on the fine bone china. The intercom buzzed. It was James. He said he needed to report in person. When the door opened, Victor was signing off on a share transfer deed. The nib of his bespoke fountain pen glided across the thick paper with sharp, authoritative strokes. James stood hovering by the door. Upon finishing, Victor looked up at him. His assistant's face was ashen. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and in his hands, he convulsively gripped a brown manila envelope. "Have you frozen the cards?" Victor asked point blank. "Yes." "And sent the email?" "I received a bounce-back alert. The email address has been deleted." James's voice was unnaturally hoarse. Victor leaned back in his chair again. "Then we wait. In 3 days, have the corporate solicitors draft a petition for—" James didn't move. He took one step toward the desk, placed the envelope down as gingerly as if it contained C4 explosives, and stepped back. "What is this?" Victor reached for the envelope. "Mr. Sterling." James's voice cracked into a half-shout and immediately died away. "Brace yourself." Victor's hand paused. He looked at his assistant. In 8 years of working for him, James had never used that tone. Victor slid the contents out of the envelope. First page. The official blue stamp of the British consulate in the bottom right corner. Header. Certificate of death. Date of civil registry cancellation. The 7th of this month. Victor's eyes welded themselves to the word death. Second page. Cause of death. Postpartum hemorrhage complicated by acute myocardial infarction. Place of death. University Hospital Zurich. Date. 10 days ago. The morning after the storm. Third page. Medical report. Eleanor Sterling, 32 years old. Diagnosis. Chronic myocardial damage secondary to prolonged fatigue and severe sleep deprivation. Myocardial fibrosis. 27%. Attending consultant's note. The lesion had been developing for no less than 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years. She had been married to him for 5. Victor's hand didn't tremble. It petrified. He couldn't even muster the motor function to turn the page. "Mr. Sterling." James's voice drifted in from somewhere far away. "There's something else. The night of the storm, I went to the Highways Agency and requested the CCTV and dashcam footage. Victor didn't move. His gaze was impaled on the line 3 to 4 years. In the footage, you can see Mrs. Sterling's car was displaced 7 meters, and your car." James swallowed hard. "What about my car?" "Your car arrived at the scene 12 minutes later. You parked 11 meters away from her Jaguar. You stood there for 40 seconds, and then you drove off with Chloe. Chloe's dashcam recorded the interior of the Jaguar. Mrs. Sterling was trapped inside. Her dress was soaked in blood and amniotic fluid. A sepulchral silence seized the office. The ambient hum of the city outside vanished. There was only one man sitting behind a £1,000,000 mahogany desk, holding 3 sheets of paper. "Mr. Sterling?" Victor sprang out of his chair like a coiled spring. The heavy leather seat flew backward and slammed into the glass. He stood there, crushing the papers in his fist. There was no emotion on his face. An absolute void, like the frozen blue screen of a dead server. And then, his stomach contracted in a ferocious spasm, as if someone had twisted a pair of iron tongs deep inside his guts. He doubled over, bracing one hand heavily on the desk. By the time James lunged forward, dark blood was already spilling from Victor's mouth. The thick drops splattered onto the death certificate, blurring the black ink. The agonizing impact of his knee slamming into the sharp edge of the desk didn't snap him out of it. It merely blew the fuse entirely. He lashed out with his arm, sweeping everything off the desk. The espresso cup flew at the panoramic window and shattered. Stacks of multi-million-pound contracts cascaded across the floor. The bespoke fountain pen rolled to the edge. He grabbed it and drove it with all his might into the oak flooring. The pen snapped in half, spraying midnight blue ink across the silver-grey carpet. "Mr. Sterling." Victor couldn't hear. He grabbed the antique Swiss carriage clock, a birthday gift from Eleanor, that he had never even bothered to look at, and hurled it at the wall. The explosive crash of shattering glass drilled into his ears. Tiny brass gears scattered across the floor like teeth. The crystal awards on his shelves came crashing down one after another. "Call them!" he roared, his vocal cords tearing, the sound like bending metal. "Call Switzerland! Tell them to verify it! It's impossible!" His knuckles, white from the strain, gripped the edge of the desk. "I don't believe she's dead. She..." Another atrocious spasm. He fell to his knees, slamming his forehead against the bottom shelf of the credenza. Another mouthful of blood surged past his lips. James, pale with terror, tried to lift him, but Victor shoved him away violently. "Don't touch me." A second later, his roar reduced to a devastated whisper. She was pregnant, 37 weeks. He slowly collapsed onto his side, directly onto the imported wool rug that cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, now littered with glass shards and stained with his own blood and ink. He didn't feel it. James stood 3 paces away, terrified to get closer. He had never seen his CEO like this. It wasn't rage. It wasn't hysteria. It was complete disintegration. As if the load-bearing columns of a skyscraper had been blown out, leaving only a hollow glass facade miraculously standing. That night, Victor stared at a fixed point on the floor without blinking. That night, her waters broke, and I drove right past. He said it in a neutral tone, without tears. And that neutrality was more terrifying than any scream, because his hands, resting on his knees, shook as if a live electrical current were running through them. "She called me," he continued. "She told me she had been in a crash. She called me by my first name. In 5 years of marriage, she never called me just because, and she never called me Victor. And I hung up on her." He squeezed his eyes shut, and I went to pick up Chloe. I got there and saw a smashed car 11 meters away, but I didn't know it was her, James. Victor's voice finally shattered completely. "In 5 years of marriage, I didn't even bother to find out what car my wife drove. I didn't know what car it was. I didn't know she was in labor. I didn't know her heart had been tearing itself apart for years trying to curate a perfect life for me. I didn't know who prepared my water at 37 degrees, or who picked my suits. I knew absolutely nothing. And now she's dead. And the boy, too." "Get out," Victor whispered, his eyes locked on the floor. A superficial calm had returned, but it was more dreadful than the screaming. "But your ulcer, sir. You're coughing up blood. Get out." James backed away toward the door. As he pulled it shut, he cast one last look at Victor. He was sitting amidst the wreckage. The late afternoon sun pouring through the glass illuminated the coffee and bloodstains on his bespoke shirt. His hands simply would not stop shaking. Left alone, Victor picked up the blood-splattered death certificate from the floor. The blue consular stamp burned his retinas. Cause. Death. He pressed the paper to his chest with both hands, clutching it so violently it was as if he were trying to embed it directly into his heart, beneath his ribs. His shoulders convulsed in silent, asphyxiating sobs like the final, agonizing death throes of a drowning man. He remembered the Dalesford organic meal preps in the fridge. He remembered the clean patch on the marble where her toothbrush used to be. He remembered the deafening silence of the bedroom at 2 a.m. He remembered blocking the bank cards of a dead woman, assuming she was throwing a tantrum. The death certificate slipped from his fingers and landed face up on the floor. He curled into a ball, burying his face in his knees. The landline on the ruined desk began to ring. He didn't move. The ringing stopped, then started again. Victor stood up mechanically. A shard of glass pierced his knee with a sharp stab of pain, but he didn't register it. On the caller ID, a name flashed. Chloe. He rejected it. The call repeated. Rejected. On the third attempt, he ripped the phone cord from the wall. As he set the receiver down, his fingers brushed the empty space where the tray of meticulously sorted documents used to sit. He stared for a long time at the subtle scratches in the polished mahogany. 20 minutes later, James was summoned back to the office. The room was still a disaster zone, but Victor was standing by the window with his back to the door. His shirt was drenched in sweat. Find out one thing. Victor's voice had regained its deep, authoritarian timbre, though every syllable clearly cost him a titanic effort. What was Chloe doing on the M4 the night of the storm? She told me she was coming from Heathrow. But the M4 isn't the only route from T5 to central London, and she wasn't on the airport spur. Victor turned around. James flinched. Beneath his boss's eyes were stark black hollows. The blood on his chin had been smeared away. The top buttons of his shirt had been violently ripped off, and deep red crescent moon fingernail marks scarred his neck. But his eyes were terrifyingly lucid. It was the implacable clarity of a man who has survived the absolute collapse of his own reality. I want a complete audit of every single thing Eleanor did in my house and in this corporation over the last 5 years. Down to the last atom. Understood. 3 hours later, James placed a thick dossier on the cleared section of the desk. Response from the Swiss hospital, James began. Death confirmed. Legalization authentic. By express wish of her grandmother, the body was cremated in Switzerland. The ashes are with the family. Contact by third parties is legally barred. The boy did not survive. They failed to save the infant after the mother's death. A protracted silence hung in the office. Victor's face looked like a shattered mirror, glued poorly back together. It appeared whole, but cracks reflected the light at every joint. Did you bring the audit? James opened the file. I've drafted a breakdown of Mrs. Sterling's duties. It is likely incomplete. First, personal domain. Nutrition, procurement of prescription medication, wardrobe curation and rotation, supervision of domestic staff. Second, agenda management. Reservations, flights, negotiation prep. Third, finances. Management of the family's offshore trust fund, internal audits, capital distribution across your 17 personal accounts, tax optimization, mortgages. Victor flinched. Repeat the third point. Trust fund management. 3 years ago, when you downsized the internal audit department, Mrs. Sterling quietly assumed that responsibility. After all, she was a brilliant actuary before you married. Victor knew she had a degree, but he had never fathomed that managing a multi-million-pound hedge fund and brewing his tea were executed with the exact same level of total, flawless dedication. She wasn't just a housewife. She had managed his entire existence like a Tier 1 investment portfolio, and he had dismissed it as wifely duties. Enough, Victor cut James off. He sat there, spreading all 10 fingers flat against the empty desk, desperately trying to anchor himself to some physical reality. The desk was empty. His life was empty. 5 years later. New York City. IDG Capital Headquarters, 47th floor. Eleanor snapped her laptop shut, and the 6 people in the glass boardroom stood up in unison. Closing the laptop was the universal signal that the meeting had concluded. 5 years is enough time to lick your wounds in Switzerland, raise a son, earn your CFA charter, join IDG as an analyst, climb to managing director of the Asia-Pacific region in 3 years, and take full control of all investment decisions in the 4th. 5 years is enough to become an entirely different person. Ellie, video conference with London at 3 p.m. Are you dialing in? Asked Colin, the regional CEO. No. Eleanor stood up. I have a flight to London Heathrow at 4 p.m., the Sterling Group project. Are you sure you want to handle that personally? We could send Colin or Sarah. I'm going, she stated without offering an explanation, and she walked out. The New York sun played across her face. At 37, she was the diametric opposite of the woman she had been 5 years ago. No heavy makeup. Hair pulled back into a severe, sleek, low ponytail. A strict, charcoal grey Savile Row tailored suit, no logos, but a cut that cost tens of thousands of dollars. Her gait had changed, upright, commanding. The old knee injury only flared as a dull ache when the barometric pressure dropped. In her eyes, not a trace of softness or submission remained, only a cold, dry clarity, like blinding high-altitude sunlight that physically hurts to look at. No excuses, only outcomes. In her corner office, her assistant Emma placed a dossier on her desk. Project, Sterling Group, Alternative Energy Division, Series B funding, 100 livres sterling million. Representative, Chief Financial Officer, Robert Sinclair. Note: CEO Victor Sterling rarely participates in preliminary negotiations. Eleanor saw his name, but her pulse didn't flutter. She scanned the report. Financial models, due diligence audits. She slipped the folder into her leather briefcase. On her desk sat a framed photograph of a 4-year-old boy in a navy peacoat, posing in front of the Bethesda Terrace in Central Park. He was smiling broadly, proudly displaying a missing milk tooth. Eleanor picked up her mobile and recorded a voice note. "Alex, Mummy is going on a business trip for 3 days. Be good for Nana." A second later, a reply chimed. "Mummy, come back soon. I miss you." Her lips curved into a minuscule, almost imperceptible smile. Then she left the office. 14 hours later, London. The Savoy Hotel, Strand. Eleanor's team arrived at the private boardroom 15 minutes early. An actuary's habit. Whoever commands the space first dictates the rules of engagement. She took the center seat at the long oak table. To her left, her head of legal, Colin. To her right, her lead analyst, Sarah. In front of each, an open MacBook. At 9 a.m. sharp, the double doors opened, and the Sterling Group delegation walked in. Leading them was CFO Robert Sinclair, followed by his deputies. Sinclair, a distinguished man with silver hair, flashed a broad corporate smile. "Eleanor, I've heard tremendous things. I must say, I didn't expect IDG to send an executive of your caliber for." "Mr. Sinclair," Eleanor interrupted in a glacial tone, not bothering to stand up. "Take a seat. Time is money. Let us begin." Sinclair's smile froze. He sat down, adjusting his tie. "If I may, I'll open the floor by—" "No, I will begin." Eleanor tapped her trackpad, and a complex graph illuminated the wall screen. "The cash flow of your energy division over the past 3 quarters deviates from the projected model by between 23% and 31%. Your average debtor collection period has ballooned from 47 to 89 days, yet your business plan assumes a constant of 45 days. Who signed off on this fabrication?" She pinned her ice-blue eyes on the CFO. Sinclair's index finger tapped nervously against the table. "Figures fluctuate, Eleanor. These are transient macro headwinds. The broader trend— I didn't ask about macro headwinds. I asked why the model states 45 instead of 89. Is this gross incompetence by your analysts, or deliberate corporate fraud?" Sinclair opened his mouth, flushing red, but Eleanor clicked to the next slide. "Second question. Within your ownership structure, there is an SPV shell company hidden in the Cayman Islands, which is nested inside an offshore holding in the British Virgin Islands, BVI. The ultimate beneficial owner is your family trust fund. The fund administrator was abruptly changed 3 years ago, correct?" The blood drained from Sinclair's face, leaving him ashen. "That was highly classified intelligence, known strictly to the core board of directors. The BVI Trust was the beating heart of the Sterling Empire, and the change of administrator had occurred a year after Eleanor's death, when Victor offloaded the management to a third-party firm. Miss Vance. That data is under strict NDA confidentiality." Eleanor slammed her laptop shut. The sharp crack made the Sterling executives flinch. "I didn't fly across the Atlantic to be patronized. If, during due diligence, I uncover hidden liabilities, I reserve the right to terminate negotiations. I am giving you 48 hours. Consult with your CEO and deliver the complete beneficial ownership structure and transaction ledgers for the last 5 years. Otherwise, IDG pulls out." She stood up. Sinclair jumped to his feet. "Have you audited our firm before?" he asked, breathless. "You know the architecture too intimately." Eleanor paused at the door without turning around. "Due diligence is my profession, Mr. Sinclair. I study my projects thoroughly." Out in the carpeted corridor, Colin whispered, "Where did you get the BVI ledger? That's not on Companies House or any public registry." Eleanor didn't reply. That evening, Canary Wharf, London, Sterling Group headquarters, 48th floor. Robert Sinclair stood in front of Victor's desk, dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Mr. Sterling, the IDG envoy has backed us into a corner." Victor sat motionless. At 41 he was leaner, his cheekbones sharper, his jawline harsher. The ruthless authority remained in his eyes, but beneath it lurked a dense, suffocating gloom. On his desk, there was only a monitor and a glass of water. No trays, no perfectly sorted documents. "What is the issue?" "The regional managing director of IDG, Eleanor." Sinclair paused, checking his notes. Eleanor Vance. Victor's hand, gripping his pen, turned to stone. He had spent 5 years repeating the name printed on the death certificate in the dead of night. American citizen. 37 years old, Sinclair continued. She's been at IDG for 3 years. Prior to that, on paper, she has 0 operational experience in the UK. But she brought up the BVI offshore accounts and the administrator change from 3 years ago. How she knows is a complete mystery. Victor dropped the pen. It clattered against the wood. How did she know about the BVI? Exactly, sir. I will attend the next round of negotiations, Victor declared, his voice dangerously quiet. The next day. 9 a.m. The Savoy Hotel. Same boardroom. Eleanor sat in the exact same chair. Navy blue bespoke suit. White silk blouse buttoned strictly to the collar. At 9:03, the doors opened. Sinclair walked in, and behind him, Victor. Eleanor's finger resting on her trackpad went completely still for 3 seconds. 5 years. He had lost weight. Charcoal grey suit, burgundy silk tie. She recognized it instantly. She had bought it for him on Bond Street 5 years ago. It was number 37 of the 64 ties in his collection. Victor swept his gaze across the room and locked onto Eleanor. For 2 seconds, his pupils dilated massively, and his lips parted slightly. The air left his lungs. Then, he slowly sat down directly across from her. "Good morning, Miss Vance." His deep voice resonated, rougher than before. She looked at him. In her eyes there was absolutely nothing. No flicker of recognition, no theatrical performance, just an absolute terrifying void, as if she was staring at a blank wall. "Mr. Sterling," she nodded curtly. "Let us begin." Under the table, Victor's hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. She projected the identical graph onto the screen. "You have 48 hours, Eleanor began, her tone like liquid nitrogen. "But since you are here in person, when exactly will we receive the corporate structuring of the BVI holdings?" Victor wasn't looking at the graph. He was looking at her. "We will provide the architecture, but the granular details pertain to my private family estate. We need to discuss this in private." "There will be no private discussions," Eleanor cut him off instantly. "My legal counsel is present. Everything proceeds through official channels." Victor leaned forward, dropping his voice. "Have you worked in London previously?" Colin's pen hovered mid-air. The question had 0 relevance to a £100 million equity deal. Eleanor held Victor's intense stare with absolute unbroken calm. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, she pronounced smoothly. For the next 40 minutes, she ruthlessly dismantled his corporate financial reporting. Victor barely heard the figures. He simply watched her as she turned the pages, obsessively noting how she tilted her head to the right at exactly 15 degrees when reading fine print. At the end of the meeting, she snapped the laptop shut. "I will reserve my final decision until I receive the full disclosures. Eleanor." Victor's voice carried a barely perceptible tremor. "Have dinner with me tonight. We will discuss the parameters of the deal." Eleanor paused by the door. "That is impossible. Send the parameters to my assistant." As they rode the lift down to the lobby, Colin looked at her. "He's an intense bloke. Did you run into him in the city before you moved stateside?" "You see all sorts in this industry," she replied dryly, stepping into the waiting Mercedes S-Class. In the back of the car, she opened an encrypted folder on her phone. Inside was the complete architectural schematic of the Sterling Group Trust Fund, drafted by her 4 years ago, and the scanned PDF of the beneficiary transfer to Chloe Harrington, bearing Victor's signature, dated 5 years and 3 months ago. Those documents were enough to tank the Sterling Group stock by £2 billion in a single trading day. But she was in no rush. Actuaries never rush. She sent a voice note. "Alex, tomorrow on FaceTime I'll show you London at night." 3 days later, the Savoy Hotel, IDG Capital's annual gala. Eleanor stood on the mezzanine balcony, holding an untouched flute of Laurent Perrier champagne. Colin approached from behind. "The Sterling delegation has arrived, including him. The 48 hours have expired, and they haven't sent the BVI ledgers." "He's come to barter," she replied. At that moment, Victor stepped into the ballroom. His gaze found her instantly, cutting through the crowd of 300 city elites, looking straight up at the balcony. They stared at each other. Separated by 1 floor, hundreds of people, and 5 years of death. At 9 p.m., Eleanor delivered a keynote speech. 12 minutes of razor-sharp, arid market statistics. Sitting in the 3rd row, Victor never took his eyes off her. The 1.5-degree head tilt was exactly the same. When she stepped off the podium, and the crowd of networking bankers dispersed. Victor approached. He stopped exactly 2 meters away, as if testing an invisible electric fence. "Eleanor," he called out. She turned. The same blank stare. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" Victor's Adam's apple bobbed. "It's you. I know it's you." Eleanor didn't blink. "I am Eleanor Vance, a United States citizen and a managing director at IDG. If you harbor any doubts regarding my identity, direct them to my solicitors. There's no record of you working in the UK." Victor's voice grew raspy. "You scrubbed your footprint, but you can't scrub muscle memory. You tilt your head 15 degrees. You hold your champagne glass in your left hand, but you never drink immediately. You button your silk shirts all the way to the top. And the BVI structure, only you knew the architecture." Her left hand tightened slightly around the stem of the flute, barely a millimeter. "You possess excellent observational skills, Mr. Sterling, but that proves nothing." Victor took a step forward, invading her space. "What do you want? Apologies? An explanation? Money?" Her tone remained utterly icy. "This is a corporate networking event. I have fiduciary duties to my fund. You have a liquidity crisis. There is no us." She stepped backward, maintaining the exact distance. Victor shuddered. His right arm shot out, and his large hand locked around her wrist with an iron grip. "Eleanor." His voice cracked open like a splitting concrete slab. 5 years. I thought you were dead. And my son." His eyes were bloodshot, shimmering with unshed tears. The hand clamped around her wrist was shaking uncontrollably. "Come back." It wasn't a demand. It was the desperate plea of a man staring over the edge of the abyss. Several guests nearby turned to look. The billionaire CEO of the Sterling Group, Victor Sterling, with red eyes and trembling hands, forcefully grabbing a female executive in public. Eleanor looked down at his hand, then slowly raised her eyes to meet his. For a fraction of a second, something akin to a freezing, clinical pity surfaced in her gaze. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice low but devastatingly firm. "You are crossing a professional boundary. In an actuary's dictionary, there is one unbreakable rule." She leaned in slightly. "Debts written off to zero cannot be reclaimed." Victor's fingers went slack, as if someone had pulled his power cord. His arm fell limply to his side. Eleanor adjusted the cuff of her blazer, concealing the faint red marks his fingers had left on her skin. She placed a business card on the adjacent cocktail table. "Your time is up. Tomorrow morning I will notify the investment committee to terminate the deal due to intentional concealment of liabilities." She turned on her heel and walked away. Victor remained frozen by the floor-to-ceiling windows, alone. Unconsciously, his hand rose to clutch the fabric of his suit jacket over his heart. Stepping out into the corridor, Eleanor walked into the ladies' room. She turned on the cold tap and held her wrist under the freezing water, washing away the ghost of his touch. She unlocked her phone and opened an encrypted file. It was the complete blueprint of capital evasion registered in the name of Chloe Harrington. She hit send to an anonymous tip line at the Serious Fraud Office. Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket and walked out to find Colin. "Kill the Sterling project. Tell them tomorrow we're officially pulling out. And book me a British Airways flight back to JFK. My son's birthday is next week." 3 days after the IDG gala, detectives from the Metropolitan Police arrived at a Chelsea townhouse to arrest Chloe Harrington. She was wearing the exact same £4,000 Burberry coat. The handcuffs clicked shut. "Chloe Harrington, you are under arrest on suspicion of insurance fraud, falsification of medical documents, and failing to stop and report a road traffic collision." Chloe's face went white as chalk. "Failing to stop? 5 years ago, on the night of the M4 storm, you T-boned the vehicle of Eleanor Sterling," the detective inspector stated dryly. "Your own dashcam recorded you, approaching her vehicle. You saw a heavily pregnant woman bleeding out, and instead of dialing 999, you phoned Mr. Sterling and fabricated a story about a perforated ulcer. You deliberately deprived her of any chance of survival." Chloe collapsed, sobbing, clinging to the doorframe. They led her away in handcuffs, illuminated by the camera flashes of the paparazzi she had spent her life courting. That same afternoon, James placed a red dossier on Victor's desk. "Chloe has been arrested. Insurance fraud for £150,000 using a forged Harley Street medical certificate regarding the ulcer and failure to stop at the scene. She saw Mrs. Sterling was dying, and she manipulated you into taking her away on purpose." Victor squeezed his eyes shut. "There's more," James added softly. "The SFO has uncovered Chloe's offshore accounts. Over 5 years she has siphoned £37 million out of your BVI trust fund using fictitious consulting contracts. And do you know whose signature authorized those transfers? Yours. Victor remembered. 5 years ago, Chloe had asked him for seed money for a startup. He had told Eleanor to draft the corporate shell, and then he had signed the paperwork without even glancing at it. Eleanor had built the vault. Chloe had looted it, and Victor had handed her the keys. Where did the SFO get such precise data? Victor croaked. An anonymous leak, containing the flawless architectural blueprint of the fund. There was only one person on Earth capable of drafting that. A week later, Victor finally read Eleanor's complete medical file from Zurich, sent via a newly discovered legal loophole. Myocardial fibrosis, 27%. Originating 3 to 4 years prior, due to chronic sleep deprivation and severe physical exhaustion. Her heart had been slowly dying for years while she brewed his Kenyan coffee, color-coded his blazers, audited his multi-million-pound funds, and while he forbade her from calling his personal mobile. Victor looked at his hands. They had started shaking again. He walked to the window. Outside, a miserable, relentless London autumn drizzle was falling. He remembered those 47 seconds. The mangled Jaguar 11 meters away. Chloe. The next day, James informed him that Eleanor was taking a 16:20 British Airways flight from Heathrow to New York. At 15:40, Eleanor sat in the back of a VIP chauffeur-driven Mercedes, outside Terminal 5. On her phone, an audio message from her son played. "Mummy, I drew a picture for you." She smiled softly. In the rearview mirror, she saw Victor. He was standing in the pouring rain without an umbrella, 5 meters from the car. The water cascaded down his bespoke suit and plastered his hair to his face. Eleanor opened the door and stepped out, but did not walk toward him. "Mr. Sterling." Victor took one step and froze. "I know. Everything." He exhaled, his voice ragged. "The ECG. Your knee. Chloe. The signatures. It's all my fault." She stared at him through the sheet of rain. "Yes," she nodded. Victor dropped to his knees, right there on the wet tarmac of the drop-off zone. All his aristocratic arrogance, his city boy pride, had been annihilated. "Eleanor, give me a chance." Eleanor stared for a long time at the pathetic figure of the man she had once loved more than her own life. "Mr. Sterling." Her voice radiated a cadaverous calm. "You had your chance 5 years ago. In the middle of that storm, I spent my 47 seconds, and you chose someone else." She didn't blink. Written-off debts are not subject to recovery. She got back into the car. The heavy door slammed shut. Victor remained kneeling in the puddle, staring at the tinted glass. The window, cracked open by an inch, slowly hummed upward and sealed shut hermetically. The Mercedes pulled away, its red taillights flashing briefly before vanishing into the grey London fog. He stayed there, on his knees in the rain. He finally understood. He hadn't just lost an obedient wife. He had murdered, with his own 2 hands, the only person in the world who had sacrificed her entire existence for him. And he had repaid her with a rule not to call, and a glance of sheer indifference 11 meters away from her blood. 3 months later, New York City. Eleanor stood on a snow-dusted lawn in Central Park. A 4-year-old boy in a navy coat and red beanie was chasing a flock of pigeons. "Mummy, they're flying away." "Walk slower, darling. They won't get scared." She adjusted his beanie, which had gone crooked. The obedient little boy tiptoed toward the birds. Her mobile vibrated. It was Colin. "Ellie, the board approved your budget for next fiscal. $2.8 billion under your management. Congratulations. Also, the Sterling Group submitted another equity request through official channels." "Denied," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Under IDG policy, corporations caught concealing financial liabilities are blacklisted for 12 months. She hung up the phone. In the distance, her son finally managed to brush the wing of a pigeon just as it took flight into the crisp sky. "Mummy, I touched it," the boy shrieked with pure joy, blinding her with his toothless smile. Eleanor walked over, scooped him up in her arms, and hoisted him onto her shoulders. "You touched it," she agreed. And finally, a genuine, wide smile broke across her face. The brilliant, dry winter sun of New York illuminated them both. She walked deeper into the park, her strides firm and unbroken, and not once did she look back.